portion, Mishpatim. And as you all know, last week's service got canceled because of the horrendous weather we experienced here in Northeast Ohio. In fact, I guess pretty much across the country to a great degree. And you brave souls who made it out here anyway, you need to have a medal or something. And but I didn't think it looked that bad, and then I got a call from Mike Carpenter, who said it's really bad out there. And I look at the window and says, I thought it doesn't look that bad to me. But I hurried up and got ready, drove about a mile, turned around, came home, and said, this is really bad out here. And so we got on the internet and started making calls as fast as we could. But I know some of you'd left the house already and missed it, and I apologize for that. So usually we have more of a heads up. The weather's really, really awful. So anyways, what we're going to do is take the teaching from last week, and we're going to be doing that this week. So it's actually going to be last week's Torah portion and half-Torah portion that we'll be looking at. I'm going to be spending more time leading up to the Haftarah portion, which is in Jeremiah 33 and 34. I want to give more background to this, because once you get to the Haftarah portion itself, it's pretty self-explanatory. But I want us to understand some background, things that are easily missed. And we're going to start with Psalm 19. Psalm 19. So if you want to turn there. When we think of God's mitzvot, of his commandments, we can easily overlook the fact that there are different categories of his commandments. And in the Hebrew, these categories are given very specific names. They have very specific meanings. And I didn't put a slide up here because I don't want to put a lot of time into this. We'll do that at another teaching. But let me just go through what some of these are. We have certain commands which are called the edot, which usually are translated as testimonies. And these are symbolic. These are symbolic commandments that have symbolic purpose, and they rehearse specific historical events, or they are to remind us of God's characteristics and his great works. Then there's pekudim, which oftentimes is translated mandates. Pekudim are commandments that have to do with how we take care of the creatures God has put under our authority. The created world that he's put under our authority, and the pekudim primarily are about how we are to deal with these things and treat them. Then there's just mitzvot, which is a wide open category, but these specifically are about our station in our daily life. These are daily things we do. And we do them every day. We do them specifically because they affect every part of daily experience. There's the chukim, which normally is translated statutes. Statutes. These are commandments that are beyond our comprehension. We don't understand why God did them. And now that Messiah has come, we do have some understanding as believers that many Orthodox Jews do not have, because these chukim usually address and point to something very specific about Messiah. The chukim are the commandments God gives. You try to figure out, why did he command us to do that? And we're simply to follow them and obey them, and because he says so. It's like a parent with a little child. Why do I have to do this? Because I said so. And there are a few things we need to have in our lives like that to remind us God is God and we are not. And then there are mishpatim. Mishpatim is usually translated ordinances or rules. And mishpatim specifically have to do with the way we deal with other human beings. I like the translation. My personal translation for mishpatim is discernments. We need a lot of discernment in knowing how to deal with other people. Now, in Psalm 19, verses 7 through 10, what I'm going to do is read this, but I'm going to put in the proper Hebrew terms, the Hebrew terms that are there. And then you can see how your particular translation translates them. This is what it says. Psalm 19, verse 7. The Torah of Adonai is perfect, reviving the soul. You ever feel kind of dead? You need revived? You need Torah. Then the edot of Adonai is sure, making wise the simple. Verse 8, the pekudei of Adonai are right, rejoicing the heart. The mitzvah of Adonai is pure, enlightening the eyes. Verse 9, the fear of Adonai is clean, enduring forever. The mishpatim of Adonai are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. When it comes to the mishpatim, David had a particular love for them. I think as king, he needed to know how to deal with people. The Mishpatim tells us how to discern and deal with people. And he found that the God's Mishpatim were sweeter than the honey and the honeycomb, more to be desired than gold, even much fine gold. They're so precious to him. In fact, they're so important that God gives us a section in his Torah called Mishpatim. Last week's Torah portion is called Mishpatim. And in Exodus 21:1, where it begins, it says, Elah ha-mishpatim, these are the mishpatim that you shall set before them. And then the rest of chapter 21, 22, 23, on up to almost getting into 24, God is giving us the rules about how to live with other people. And then when you get to the end of the Torah portion, in Exodus 24:3, it says, Moses came and told the people all the words of Adonai and all the mishpatim. So that section from 21:1 on up through 24, these are the mishpatim. And David had a special love for these. He loved all the commandments. Just read Psalm 119. But the mishpatim are especially valuable, because we have to know how to deal with other people, how to live with them. In Psalm 119:13. Now remember, Psalm 119 is the longest chapter in the Bible. It takes the Hebrew alphabet, which has 22 letters, and it takes Aleph, the first letter. It has 8 verses that each begin with Aleph. And then you go to the next letter, Beit, and there are 8 verses that all begin with a Beit. Then it goes to Gimel, the third letter, and there are 8 verses that begin with Gimel. It does this, 8 verses for each letter of the alphabet till you get to the end of the psalm, which is the letter Tav. And in verse 13 it says, with my lips I have counted up the mishpatim of your mouth. Now, that word counted up is an interesting word. The word saper, there's the root right there. And it means to tell or to count. A person who makes a Torah scroll is called a sofer, which comes from the same root, because when he makes the scroll, he counts every letter in every column, because he knows how many letters are supposed to be there for every column, for every paragraph, for every book. And he checks his numbers. He's a counter. And that's what really a sofer is, the one who writes a Torah scroll. He's a counter. He's a letter counter. He makes sure the letters are perfect. And so David is saying, with my lips, I'm counting and I'm recounting and I'm telling your mishpatim. And what does he say? The mishpatim of your mouth. Look at the beauty and the balance in this verse. He's saying, God, from your mouth on Mount Sinai, from your mouth, you spoke forth your mishpatim. And now with my lips, I'm speaking the same words that came out of your mouth. My mouth is involved with what came from your mouth. The words in my mouth are the words that came from yours. And I'm counting them. They're like precious coins, like precious jewels. I don't want one to slip through the cracks. Every single one of them is precious. Every single one of them draws me closer to you. And I want to tell you something. I want to share something with you. I want you to examine your own life. You know, as we go through these portions about the tabernacle, as I was sharing earlier during the Torah service, it's a time for us to examine our own tabernacles. There's more information in the Bible about the tabernacle and the temple than about any other subject in Scripture. It's very important because learning about the tabernacle, you learn about you and how you should be. It brings order to your life. It brings structure and balance to your soul. And so I want you to examine your soul for a second. And ask yourself, what do you think of God's commandments? The baby believer, the infant believer, the one who's young in faith, even though they may have been a believer for decades, they can still be an infant when it comes to their faith. And they look at God as one who's there to meet their needs. He's there to solve problems. He's there to love them and give them security. If this is how you look at God, this is infantile faith. It's important and it's precious to him. And we all have to start there. But those are the same things that an infant thinks about their parents. He's there for my security. There to provide for me, to love me, to solve my problems. And so if you look at keeping God's commandments as a way of just simply bailing you out of your troubles, protecting you from harm, and it does that. If you look at his commandments as something to do so that you can avoid all kinds of pitfalls, and they do that. And if you look at his commandments as something you do so that God doesn't get disappointed with you, because he loves, especially loves those who keep his commandments. That's all fine and good. But that is not the ultimate purpose of God's commandments. The ultimate purpose of God's commandments is so that we can connect intimately with him, so that his words become our words, and his ways become our ways. Because when we imitate him, we do so by obeying what he says to do. Because what he expresses as his commandments are an expression of how he thinks, of how he works. They're expressions of his character, of his standards, of his holiness. And as we follow that pattern in our lives, we connect deeply with him. But we have to look at his commandments on that level. Don't ever pick up a commandment and say, oh, God's going to be mad at me if I don't do this, but if I do this, he'll be real happy with me. Look at each commandment as an opportunity to connect deeply with God, as an opportunity to express love to him. Because the Messiah says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And these commandments of the Torah are his. All right? And if you don't keep his commandments, it's for one of two reasons. You don't know them, or you know them and you just don't love God. Okay? It's one or the other. David loved God, and he saw his commandments as precious things, precious opportunities. Each one was a doorway to go through, to connect with him, to become one with him, to know him in a way that he cannot be known any other. And so that's the heart I want me to have for his commandments, and I want us all to have. Now, when we look at God's commandments, if we go to the Torah portion before Mishpatim, that's Torah portion Yitro, where the 10 words, 10 commandments are found, I want you to notice something. The very first commandment, Exodus 20, verse 2, is this: I am Adonai, your God. And in Hebrew, the word your is singular. God speaking to each of us as individuals. I am Adonai, your God, who brought you, it's singular again, out of the land of Egypt. Now you think, well, I've never even been to Egypt, so it doesn't apply to me. The word Egypt, Mitzrayim in Hebrew, means constriction, a place of being strangled, a place where you can't move, a place where you're being smothered. It's a place of death. It's a place of slavery. It's a place of being separate from God. We've all been there. And God says, I brought you out of there, out of the house of slavery. Now you think, well, that's not a commandment. Well, you're right. And the 10 commandments in the Torah are never called the 10 commandments. They're called the Esra Devarim, the 10 words. 9 of which are commandments, but the first one is simply a statement that you either believe or you don't. So the other 9 commandments are all based on faith. This is the way they have been enumerated from ancient times. It's only in modern times, through Catholicism and different branches of Christianity, we've numbered them differently. But from ancient times, this was the first, right here. And notice there's no commandment. It's simply a statement. God says, this is who I am. This is what I've done for you. Now, if you believe that, here's what I want you to do so we can get along together. That's how the 10 Commandments begin. Then as we move forward into last week's Torah portion, Exodus 21:1, which we read, these are the Mishpatim. The next verse says, when you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. Now, the first of the 10 commandments, the 10 words, God's reminding us that we were in bondage, and he took us out of bondage. And then when he comes to the Mishpatim, these are the rules for how you get along with other people. The very first one is, if you have a servant, a slave, he works for 6 years, and the 7th, he goes free. Do you notice the connection here? God's saying, this is what I've done for you. Now this is what you do for one another. And then when you come to the end of Mishpatim, Mishpatim, which is in chapter 23, verse 24. This is the very last of the rules he gives in this section. Look what it says. You shall not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do as they do, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their pillars in pieces. This is talk about when you come into the land of the Canaanites. And notice what he says. Do not serve them. I don't want you going into slavery again. I've set you free. You set one another free, and don't you dare go back into slavery ever again. But I've got news for you. We all say we like liberty and freedom. But deep down, we really don't. It scares us to death. We say we want it, but we don't really want freedom. We want to be like the infant, and infants are not free, you know. We want to be like the infant where we have safety and security. Everything's provided for us. We are put to bed and tucked in. We are fed. We are changed. And everything's just done for us. We're all born little socialists, you know, when we come into this world. We love this nanny state. And we want everything done for us. We say, oh, but I want freedom. Really? Because that's what Mishpatim are for. This is what the commandments God gave in the wilderness were for. So they could live as a free people. But what do they always want to do? They go, wah, I want to go back to Egypt. They'd rather be slaves in Egypt where the food's provided, the clothing's provided, the housing's provided, everything's provided. I'd rather have that with slavery than to have freedom without those things. Freedom's for the mature. Liberty's for the mature. And I'm talking about spiritually now. You really want to be free? Then keep God's commandments. Because the essence of God's commandments are freedom and liberty. Freedom and liberty. And I don't care what the world tells you, and I don't care what well-meaning teachers may tell you from the pulpit. The commandments of God do not enslave us, they set us free. Remember, the 10 commandments, what's the first one? I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Then you come to the Mishpatim, the rules that God gives from Mount Sinai. The very first one, if you have a Hebrew slave, 6 years he works for you, 7th, you let him free for nothing. He goes free completely by grace. You read through the Mishpatim, you come to the very last one. Don't bow down to these gods. Do not serve them. Don't become slaves again. Everything about God's commandments are bookended by freedom, 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 freedom. But you've got to be mature to keep them. But keeping them will help you become mature. The enemy would like to deceive us into thinking that God's commandments enslave. They do everything but. They set us free. James understood this. Look what James says. If a person looks closely into the perfect Torah, which gives freedom. Now, you're all aware this is from the New Testament, right? James is a Christian. No, Martin Luther wanted the book of James ripped out of the Bible because he thought, oh no, he's turning people back to the law, back to slavery. No. Slavery is what comes without Torah. Torah brings freedom. In the Greek, the best way to translate it is the liberating Torah. If any person looks closely into the perfect Torah, it's perfect. Where do you get that? From Psalm 19. The Torah of the Lord is perfect. It's complete. You add to it, it's not perfect anymore. You take away from it, it's not perfect anymore. Leave it alone. It's perfect just the way it is. Every jot, every tittle, every letter, don't mess with it. Just study it and chew on it and put it into your life, but don't change it. So, let me get through the verse now without stopping. But if a person looks closely into the perfect Torah, which gives freedom and continues becoming, not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work it requires, then he will be enslaved? No, he will be blessed in what he does. Everything about the Torah is freedom and blessing, liberty. And as if you didn't get it here, in the next chapter, James says this: keep speaking and acting like people who will be judged by a Torah which gives freedom. You got it? There's a wonderful midrash on the verse Exodus 32:16. In Exodus 32:16, it describes God making the tablets. He cuts them out and then he inscribes with his finger on the tablets. And what's interesting, and most of you may know this, but according to Jewish legend, now again, this is not in the Bible, this is a Jewish tradition legend that's been handed down. But you know what? It's so beautiful, I believe it's true. But we'll see. It says that when God inscribed his words on the two tablets, 5 here, 5 here, that the letters didn't just go partway through the stone, they went all the way through the stone and out the back. Yeah. So it was like this. If you took the stone tablet and held it up, his letters were the light. His letters were the non-physical part. The stone was the physical. But his word was light. It just came straight through the tablets. Can you imagine such a thing? But it says the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets, or in the tablets. That word for engraved is the word charut. Charut. And there's a midrash on this that goes like this. This is from the Midrash Rabbah, which was very well known when Yeshua was here, because it predates the coming of Messiah. And it says, and the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven, charut, upon the tablets. And then the Midrash says, don't read charut, but cherut, freedom. Now, it's not saying change the Torah. It's not what it's saying. It's saying when you see the word charut, remember that it is the root for the word cherut, which means liberty. And the only difference between the two words is the addition of the letter yud right there. I'm sure James was thinking of this midrash when he wrote his epistle about the Torah of liberty. When you take this word freedom, it's very interesting how the Hebrew works here. If we divide it in half right here, what is this first part? Chai. What does that mean? Life. L'chaim, life. And the last three letters, root, well, that's the name Ruth in Hebrew. But the meaning of the word Ruth is beauty. And what God is speaking to us here, the inner meaning of this is that when you follow God's commandments, when you follow his laws, when you follow his Torah, you will have a beautiful life, a blessed life, a liberated life. Is that what you want? You all say, oh yeah, that's what I want. No, you don't. Most of you really don't want that. Because freedom requires tremendous responsibility. Tremendous responsibility. And honestly, I'm always banging my head against that responsibility. I'm always bruising myself up with it because I don't like the responsibilities of keeping the Torah. But to the degree I keep his Torah, oh my goodness, life is incredible. Instead of walking and running, you mount up on eagles and fly. Well, let's read the Haftarah portion. The Haftarah portion begins in Jeremiah chapter 34 and verse 8. Chapter 34 and verse 8. And I think it will be obvious early on why this was chosen as the section from the prophets to accompany this section from the Torah. Jeremiah 34, verse 8. A couple of words that are used frequently in here are the words liberty. And the word for liberty used here is the word doror. And the other word that's used quite often, even more, is the word turn, shuv, where we get the word teshuvah, repentance, turn. And so I will use the word turn whenever that is the root word used in the Hebrew. All right, are we ready? Jeremiah 34:8. The word which came to Jeremiah from the Lord after King Zedekiah had made a covenant with all the people in Jerusalem to proclaim liberty among them, that everyone should set free his Hebrew servants, both male and female, and that no one should keep his fellow Judean in bondage. So far, so good. Zedekiah has made this decree. You know what? We've been keeping these servants past the 6 years the Torah allows us. We need to set them all free. So they do. Verse 10, everyone, officials and people who had entered into the covenant, heard or agreed to set their male and female servants free and not keep them in bondage any longer. They complied and let them go. But afterward, they turned about and turned them back, the men and the women that they had freed, and forced them into bondage again. Then it was that the word of Adonai came to Jeremiah from Adonai. And I don't know why Adonai is mentioned twice in that verse. Well, let's pause there for a second. They do this good thing, then later decide, I wish I hadn't done that good thing. And so they undo the good thing that they did. It had been better not to do the good thing than to undo it after they had done it. I'm wondering, what was going through their heads? You know, if you read in the Torah portion, Mishpatim, there in Exodus 21, it says that if a servant serves you, he serves you for 6 years. In the 7th year, he goes out free for nothing. And it gives a few more details. It says, but if he says, I love my master, I don't want to go free, I want to stay with him, then he is to be brought to the doorpost of the house. The master puts an awl through his ear and puts it into the door of the doorpost. There'll be a little blood spot there. And the man has a pierced ear, and he remains his servant forever. Now, one who does this kind of service is one who's done it out of a position of freedom, not out of a position of have to. But I'm wondering if these people here in Jeremiah, if they thought, okay, we're going to set them free, but you know what? They'll love us so much, they'll just want to stay. They'll want to stay with us. And we'll be nailing people's ears to the doors all over town. But nobody wanted to stay. And because things didn't work out, this is how I imagine it, because things didn't work out, well, we're just going to make them stay then, because they don't know what's good for them. That's how I imagine it happening. I don't know. But verse 13, thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, I made a covenant with your fathers when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. Notice the quote from the first commandment, saying, quote, in the 7th year each of you must let go any fellow Hebrew who may be sold to you. When he has served you 6 years, you must set him free, unquote. Notice the quote. It's the first commandment in Mishpatim. But your fathers would not hear me or give ear. Lately you turned about and did what is proper in my sight, and each of you proclaimed liberty to his countrymen. And you made a covenant accordingly before me in the house which bears my name. But now you have turned back and have profaned my name. Each of you has turned back the men and women whom you had given their freedom and forced them to be your servants again. Assuredly, thus said the Lord, you would not hear. Now, the word hear and the word obey are the same thing. Okay? To hear something means to obey it. That's true in Greek, and it's also true in Hebrew. You would not hear, you would not obey. You would obey me and proclaim deror, liberty, each to his kinsmen and countrymen. Behold, I proclaim your liberty, declares Adonai. Liberty to the sword, to pestilence, and to famine. And I will make you a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth. I will make the men who crossed over my covenant, who did not fulfill the terms of the covenant which they made before me, like the calf which they cut in two, so as to pass between the halves. And then it goes on and gives more detail. Now the question is, what's the personal application? The Torah, the Word of God, the prophets, that always has an inner meaning. The outside speaks to our understanding. It speaks historically to the events that happened there in Jerusalem under Zedekiah. But the inner meaning speaks to our spirits. Because every one of us have slaves. Or people we like to think of as our slaves. Or people we like to control as if they were our slaves. We all do. Husbands and wives. How many times have you tried to control your spouse? Tried to control them. To get them to submit to your ways and to change them. Parents with children. Of course you're to raise your children in the fear and admonition of the Lord, but how many of you try to manipulate their emotions? Pour guilt on them? Maybe use unnecessary fear tactics to control them, to manipulate them. Children, how many of you do the same thing with your parents? I am convinced that the main source of all of our unhappiness, frustration, anger in our lives is the frustration we have by trying to control other people. I'm really convinced of that. I was talking to Rod about this a little bit last night as we read through the portion. She said, well, how about circumstances? Sometimes we get frustrated and angry at circumstances, but not near as much as we do at the people we want to control. And then what happens is eventually we find out I can't control anybody. And that's true, you can't. You can't change anybody. And so then the next thing we do is we start putting up walls. Walls. We think this is for our protection. I've often shared with individuals of you in conversation, I said, what's the difference between a fortress and a prison? There's no difference. Just one of attitude. People talk to say they just want to be secure. They want to protect themselves. I said, well, you want security? Just go into prison. That's maximum security right there. And when we build walls to separate us from other people, those walls become our prisons. They don't harm the other people. They're going to go, they're still out there. But the more we put up walls, we put up a shell, we think, because I don't want to be hurt. We're going to make ourselves so they can't hurt me anymore. Well, you're just building a prison around yourself. You may think you're in a fortress protecting yourself. Everybody else looking through the bars says, he's in prison, a jail he made. I forget who it was. It might have been C.S. Lewis, but he said, every prison that we build for ourselves, the keyhole is on the inside. Isn't that something? You're a prison, and the keyhole is on your side of the door. It's not on the outside. Nobody can unlock it from the outside. You can only unlock it from the inside. What we have to do is be willing to be hurt, to make ourselves vulnerable, to put ourselves out there, to love people and let them do to us whatever they want, because at least I am still free. Will I experience pain? Absolutely I will. I'd rather be free and experience the hurt of others than be in a prison, to be a slave. You follow? Now this passage in verse 17, at the end of 17, I proclaim your release, declares Adonai, to the sword, to pestilence, and to famine. Those are three very interesting words, but only in the Hebrew does it come out. There it is. I proclaim you liberty to the sword, to pestilence, and to famine. And then when you read this in the Hebrew, you find these three words. The word for sword is the word charav. The word for pestilence is the word davar. Well, it's not pronounced davar, it's davar, I believe. It's the same spelling, davar. Davar means word. Pestilence is pronounced a little bit differently, but same spelling. Famine is ra'av. Now, even if you don't know Hebrew, do you notice something similar about those three words? There's only one letter difference between the three of them. All three words contain the letters resh and beit. Resh and beit there. In pestilence, the resh and beit are reversed. And then in famine, the resh is at the front and beit's at the back. Isn't that interesting? So God does these things to get our attention and think, why are these three words? He could have picked a lot of different words that express the same thing. God's wanting to say, look over here, focus. So let's think about these for a moment. Sword, pestilence, famine. Which of the three of these is the quickest way to die? The sword, definitely quickest. Which is the slowest? Famine. So we see here that there's a progression from quick to slow. When you try to enslave other people with your emotions, with your manipulations, when you try to control other people, sometimes the repercussions in your life will be very fast. Sometimes they'll be very slow, maybe over a period of decades. I know of a couple, you don't know them, you don't know them at all, but I've known them most of my life. And why in the world this couple has stayed married, I don't know. Well, I guess I do. They each have one goal in life, and that's to make the other one as miserable as possible. And they can't do that if they're not married to each other. So they live under the same roof, and when they're outside, one is cussing out the other one. They're always working like crazy. Work. One day I saw them out there with a toothbrush cleaning the mortar between the grout, between the bricks of the house. I mean, they have a very small life, small world. And just screaming at each other, hating each other, miserable. They hate everybody else. And they stay married. And their famine has gone on for years. Their famine. And they live in a prison that they together have made. But I want us to notice something else. I want us to take the first letter of each word. Chet, Dalet, Resh. That spells a word. It spells the word cheder, which means a room or a chamber. Remember, who's experiencing these things? These are people who refused to let their slaves go. They are the ones who refuse freedom to another. And what happens? They just make a room for themselves. It could be a cell. He's built a cell for themselves. You want to know how to have freedom when it comes in regards to other people? Here's how you can have freedom. You don't try to control them, and you don't build walls between you and them. You control yourself. Try that one on. But that takes maturity. And that takes submission to God's commandments. But I don't know how this works, but I know that it does. When Robin irritates me, it's very rare, extremely rare occasion. When I find something about her that I find a little grating or irritating, I used to try to change her, and it always made things worse. And then I read something somewhere that was very spiritual, and it said, no, change yourself instead. It's like, she's the one with the problem, you know? But this kept saying, no, everything's connected. It's not on the physical, it's on the spiritual. You change yourself. And I did. I worked on something in my life. And all of a sudden, Robin didn't have a problem anymore. It just evaporated. Poof, it was gone. And I've seen this over and over and over again. Not just with my wife, but with my kids, with my neighbors, with friends. And it's like God has put people in my life as mirrors to reflect back things in me I need to fix. But if I think the problem's with the mirror, like one rabbi said, you know, if your hat's crooked, you don't fix it by tilting the mirror. It doesn't help. If you want to change what you see, change what is under your control to change, which is you. Fix what's in you. Control what's in you, and the other person will transform before your eyes. I promise it. It's a spiritual law. I don't know how it works. I know that it does. And many of you have experienced the same thing as well in your lives. It's an incredible thing. Self-control is the way to experience true freedom. It's the way to truly have a close relationship with someone else. Yes, men, I see your hand up there.
I'm just thinking about how about forgiveness?
Well, that's how you set people free. Yes? Yes. Absolutely. Men is talk about forgiveness. One person said that, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but he said, forgiveness is setting the prisoner free, then discovering that the prisoner was you. Isn't that true? So true. So do you want freedom? Do you really want freedom? Freedom is not free. It's going to cost you controlling yourself. It's going to require you to control yourself from within instead of relying on people to control you from the outside. It's going to require you to grow up. Freedom is for the mature, not for the infant. Freedom is for the mature, for the strong. You're going to get strong by practicing freedom. Freedom comes from keeping God's commandments and submitting to them. And you know, I was going through my notes, and I realized it's been 9 years since we went through the Haftarah portions. 9 years. It was back in 2005, and I came across this note I wrote to myself. And I shared it then, and I think it's still true today. And this is speaking of me to you. It says, it may seem that I am constantly harping on the importance of obeying the commandments of Torah. But if someone could tell me what is more important for this or any other congregation than to submit our thoughts and behavior to the will of our Creator, then I will harp on that instead. But I do not know of a higher calling or a deeper blessing or a greater privilege than to know God and to walk in His ways. And His ways are found only in His Torah and exemplified in Yeshua, His Messiah. So I'm going to finish with an illustration. I'm going to draw some invisible walls, which I know is an oxymoron, but if I don't draw them, you can't see them, and you need to be able to see them for the purpose of this illustration. Okay, see that line? No, you don't. It's invisible. You don't see it. Now listen, all right? Here's another one. All right, you see that line? Good. You're not supposed to. It's invisible. All of us are walking a path between invisible walls. We don't see them there because they're invisible, but they are there, and they are bulletproof. You can't go through them. But the Torah tells us where the walls are. Now, without Torah, without the Word of God, without Messiah, this is how life goes. We start off, let's say, here. And we see something over here that looks really incredible and wonderful. So we start running toward it. And this is as far as we get. We hit the wall and we go, ouch. We get knots on our heads and bruises and broken bones. Or I should say, we get a broken spirit. We get disappointment. We get hurt. We get grief. We get frustration. We get anger. And then our reaction is, let's try it again. Boom, boom, boom. And finally we realize, well, it's not worth it. And so we run away from it and often try to chase something else. And we realize we can't get it. Here's an example. You may think that this goal out here is owning a particular thing. Maybe it's a car, or a particular house, or it doesn't make a difference what it is. And you think ownership of that thing will bring you joy and happiness. But what you find, whether you get the thing or not, you find that it doesn't. It was all a sham. It was all a mirage. You may think that this relationship with this person of the opposite sex will fulfill you, and boom, it doesn't. This fulfillment that is out here, you find out you cannot reach. And then you know what you sometimes do? Let's go back to number one. Boom, you run into the wall again. You still can't get it. Well, then we want to aspire to some religious notion out here, some lofty thing. And boom, we run into the wall. And we just ricochet about in our lives, and it's just a mess. Now, here's a better way to live. You can think of this as two invisible walls. I like to think of it as a ladder. It's invisible. It's spiritual. You can't see it. It's totally non-physical. And up here is the goal, which is a Messiah. Whoops. I don't know how that happened. Let me get that back there. There we go. The goal is Messiah. And you know, in Paul, as a believer, he talks about his goal is Messiah, to know him in the power of his resurrection, to be the fellowship of his sufferings, to live a life like his. And that life is found in the Torah. This is a Torah scroll, in case you need some help. And so you start here, you make him your goal, and look, if we could do it perfectly, and we won't, we tend to still ricochet our way up. We're going to find this path. It's a little straight and a little narrow, but that's freedom. That's where freedom is. The walls are still invisible, but you don't experience the pain of chasing things that are outside of his will. And in fact, he says, if you seek him first and his kingdom, his righteousness, all these other things are added to you. The joy you thought you'd get from those things, you get that joy in some way or another all the way up as you ascend. Now, some of us, we want to hug one wall or the other. This is extremism. We want to hug one wall or the other. It's not quite freedom, but it's better than this other diagram on the left. But the truly free person has his eyes set on the goal and nothing else interferes. And his life is a life of joy and of freedom because he's practicing self-control. He controls himself according to God's rules. And when we do that, it's a beautiful life. It is a kai root, a life of beauty. It's freedom. You follow? That's how it works. That is how it works. Well, you know, our Haftarah portion starts in chapter 34 and ends in chapter 33, which seems a little backward. But the rule that the rabbis followed when they picked Haftarah portions is that each Haftarah portion must end on a positive note. And so for them to end on a positive note, they had to go backward a chapter. And you know that word shuv, that word turn, which is found so many times in chapter 34? I think that's a hint that we're to go back to chapter 33. And this is how the Haftarah portion ends. This undergirds everything in chapter 34. Even with the sword and the pestilence and famine, underneath all of it is God's love. And all the bumps and the bruises that come from hitting the walls, even those are an expression of God's love. C.S. Lewis calls these a severe mercy, because he's not letting us get outside of the walls. He's keeping us in them. But even the pain we experience, even the downfalls we experience, are to contribute to our wisdom and our maturity. And to learn, I need to keep my goal, my eyes on the goal, which is Yeshua and his ways. So even the pain in your life, even the defeats, they all are for our good. So Jeremiah 33, verse 25 is where it begins. It says, "Thus said Adonai, as surely as I have established my covenant with day and night, the laws of heaven and earth, so I will never reject the offspring of Jacob, my servant David. I will never fail to take from his offspring rulers for the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Indeed, I will restore their fortunes and take them back in rachamim, which is mercy, loving mercy." So even when God brings the sword or pestilence or famine, he brings pain into your life. Those are you experiencing the invisible walls. That's you banging into his limits. And even those are placed there out of love. So we can learn to walk a straight path. Get our eyes off all these false goals out here, all these phantoms. And keep your eye on the goal of who he is. The goal of God, of Messiah, of his Torah. And what a life you're going to live. It's going to be great. Adam, I see your hand up.
This kind of illustration reminds me of the Abraham and Lot situation.
Yes.
Granted, I want to picture it less than historically accurate, because I think horses with cowboy hats.
Yeah.
They're surveying this landscape, and they say, we'll each take the direction to go. And at no point, as the reader, do I think, I hope I don't dig some room. We never think, they're going to dig out a shovel and dig a second.
Yeah.
We have an understanding that there's physical boundaries, and we define freedom in that sense. When you say, hey, you can go wherever you want, I'm not going to jump up to the ceiling.
Right.
And I think spiritually, we forget that there are boundaries, and we have freedom to do anything. There's things you simply cannot attain. And we have to operate in freedom within this set of boundaries, because if there's chaos, we have to.
That's right. You bring up a great example, Adam. Adam brought up the example of Abraham and Lot, his nephew. And, their sheep herders began to butt heads, so to speak, and they realized, okay, we need to separate the two camps. And what's interesting, there in Genesis, Abraham approaches Lot and he says, okay, listen, if you pick the south, I'll go to the north. If you pick the north, I'll go to the south. So which way did Lot go? He went east. That was not an option. So he went down to the land of Sodom. Now, the goal that Lot thought he would find was easy life, green fields, easy life, a settled community. Oh, looks like easy street. Now, he physically made it to Sodom, but he never made it to the joy and satisfaction that he was allured to. He reached the physical goal, but he never reached the goal of the joy and fulfillment he thought Sodom would give him. It was misery. It was embarrassment. And eventually it was death. So, it's a great example you give us. There's so many like that. That's great. Jim, saw your hand up.
In Exodus, where directions are given for a Hebrew slave owner to release his slave after 6 years. When does a slave become released from another country, or does a Hebrew only have Hebrew slaves.
Oh, okay. What if it's a Gentile servant and not a Hebrew servant, is what you're saying? Okay. The Hebrew servants had to be released after 6 years, but the Gentile servants be released at the year of Jubilee. Okay? But they all get free. Yeah. They all get free. God's goal is freedom for everybody. Yeah. Phil.
To kind of bring together two ideas we talk about so much, keeping Messiah as the goal and making a beeline for him, and then thinking about how as children of God we just oftentimes don't prefer freedom and we like enslavement. I think the best way to blend the two and see a balance is how Paul chose so many different times to refer to himself as a servant, a bondservant, or even a slave to Christ, knowing that he preferred to be focused on one thing,
Yeah, that's what's so interesting is Paul calls himself a bondservant. In other words, he's one who chose to stay. But he could leave anytime he wanted. These bondservants say, I'm going to stay with you forever. Okay, you can. But each day they chose to stay because they could walk any day they want. After their 6 years, they could walk anytime they want. So each day was a free choice to remain and serve this master who I love. So he's not serving his master anymore as a slave. He's serving his master from now on as a free man. And there's a world of difference between those two. One, he was serving because he had to. But the other, he's serving because he wants to and he loves the one he serves. A world of difference between the two. On the outside, it looks the same. But the internals are completely different. And Robin will give you the last word.
Do you think that one of the problems that we have in the West in particular is that our association with freedom is leisure?
Yeah.
And I think that people assume that if you're a free person, you don't have rules and you don't have a lot of work to do. You have leisure. You don't have a lot of responsibilities and those cumbersome duties. And people look at Torah and they don't even understand it.
Yes.
And they make an assumption that it's restrictive and that it's a drudgery because they forget that God created us to be purposeful and to be productive and to have important work to do. And that's what brings freedom.
Absolutely.
Leisure doesn't.
No.
You think it does, but that's the mirage.
Right.
And I think that in the West it's worse because we picture slavery, slaves work, free people sit around and have people feed on their big leaves and be great.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not life.
Yeah, freedom is not a life of leisure. It's a life of purpose, but always of self-control. There has to be a goal. There has to be progress. There has to be climbing the ladder. So there's work involved, very definitely. But you find a person with constant leisure, you find a miserable person. Yeah. Leisure does not fulfill. We need leisure occasionally, and God builds it into his calendar. But to live a life of leisure is not to live at all.
So Christians think that to live Torah takes away their freedom because it gives them rules they have to obey and they're going to be restricted. And it's opposite.
It's exactly the opposite. Yeah, it's exactly the opposite. Yeah, the Torah brings freedom, not restriction. Now, I do know people who live out the Torah in a very restrictive, legalistic kind of a prisoner mentality. But that's not Torah. That's not Torah. That's just external physical rules. But people who truly live out the Torah, the spirit of Torah is such freedom. For where the spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And we could go on for a long time on this discussion, couldn't we? But I think you get the gist of what I'm trying to get across. I want to be a free person. I'm going to do that only as I exercise control over myself. And I'm going to finish with one last insight. There's always one more, but this one's important. When we did the Torah service, we had a little time left over. We invited people to share insights from the Torah portion, and Rob Horger was sharing about the table of showbread that was in the holy place, in the tabernacle. And, if you could go into the tabernacle, there'd be the curtain, and on the other side of the curtain, there's the Holy of Holies. You can't go in there. But on your right would be the table of showbread. In Hebrew, it's shulchan panim, which means the table of faces. Pan is face, panim is faces. The table of faces. Nobody knows why it's called that, but it's called the table of faces. Then on the left is the menorah. And in the menorah, built into the stems of the menorah, are these things, these blossoms, and the word there's a Hebrew word for almond. I can't remember exactly what the word is, but the word for almond is also a word for eye, like you see with. And we talk about someone who has almond-shaped eyes, and almonds do have the shape of a human eye, and so it talks about the eyes in the menorah. So you've got the bread of faces, and you've got the eyes in the menorah, and this room we're in is a picture of the soul. So it's like you have these two things that are looking across this empty space at one another. And inside of you, you've got a left and a right. You've got a nephesh and a neshama. Your soul is in two halves. And you know what it's like. If you were at the prayer service this morning, there you are, you're reading the words and you're singing the words. There's another part of it over here saying, wow, you're doing such a great job focusing on the prayer service. Or there's someone over there thinking, I wish Tim would sing that in a lower key. And you're singing, but there's another part of you watching you do what you're doing. Have you ever been in prayer? I mean, just at home, just praying. And you're praying, and you're pouring out your heart to the Lord, and another part of you saying, good job, do a good job of that prayer. God's got to get hold of this one. Yeah, man. Do you do that? That's what's pictured, bread of faces. And you've got what you're doing here, and you've got these eyes watching and commenting. And I don't quite understand it. But one half of your soul will comment on the other half, whatever you're doing. You ever talk to yourself? You talk to yourself. Who's the you and who's the yourself you're talking to? So when I talk about self-control, you controlling yourself, who's the you, and who is the self that you are controlling? And do you have any business controlling yourself? Maybe yourself should control you instead. You see what I'm saying? But then you come to Psalms, I think, don't quote me on this, I think it's 86:11, 86:13, somewhere right in there, but it says, Lord, unify my heart, levav. Unify. It's the word echad, make it one. Because I'm torn. I'm always, is this part and this part comes in at. Make it one. Make it one. Unify it. And I haven't reached that yet. I get little glimpses of what that might be like, and it's wonderful. But there's this struggle all the time going on inside of us, isn't it? Oh, well, let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you so much for this time of looking into your amazing and wonderful Torah. We thank you for your prophets. And we thank you for all of your word, most of all for your Messiah, who is the Word made flesh. We thank you for how he exemplified a life of freedom, of joy, and of dignity. And oh, we know that he experienced pain and disappointment. But he never put up walls between himself and others. And even as he went to the cross, without resistance, like a lamb going to the slaughter, he did not put up a fight. And his heart and mind is, if this is what they want to do to me, then they may do so. So, Father, we can lift him up and make him king, or we can spit upon him and nail him to a cross. He'll let us do either one. That takes incredible courage and self-control. So, Lord, I pray you'd help us to live a life of such freedom. Freedom from fear. Freedom from trying to resist any pain or discomfort. But, Lord, to live a life to keep our eyes on the goal. As it says of the Messiah, who for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. Help us to be that kind of a person like Yeshua. And we'll give you all the glory for it, for you deserve it all. In his name, amen.